Newbie, prove it!
Newbie, prove it! The SEAL yelled, his fist closing around a handful of silver-streaked hair. The mess hall at Coronado fell silent. 40 elite operators watched Chief Petty Officer Ryan Kowalski drag the 54-year-old woman from her chair, convinced she was just another Pentagon paper pusher who'd wandered into the wrong building. His hand never reached her shoulder. In 3 seconds flat, the 220-pound SEAL enforcer was screaming on the concrete floor, his wrist twisted at an angle that made combat veterans look away. The woman hadn't even spilled her coffee. What none of them knew was that they'd just assaulted the most decorated Delta Force operator in American history. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from in the comments, and if this story grips you, make sure you subscribe, because tomorrow we've saved something extraordinary just for you. Margaret Brennan had walked into hostile territory more times than she could count. Safe houses in Fallujah, where insurgents waited behind every door. Mountain caves in Afghanistan, where Taliban fighters held every advantage. Syrian compounds where one wrong step meant death for her entire team. But none of those environments had prepared her for the peculiar brand of arrogance that saturated the officers' mess at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado at 1900 hours on a Tuesday evening. She was 54 years old. Her hair had gone silver at the temples a decade ago, and she'd stopped caring about hiding it around the same time she'd stopped caring about what men thought of her appearance. 25 years in Delta Force had taught her that vanity was a luxury operators couldn't afford, and retirement hadn't changed that fundamental truth. Her orders had brought her here 3 hours ago. Classified assessment. Inter-unit cooperation failures. 8 operators dead in a joint mission disaster that never officially happened in a country that would never be named. Someone needed to figure out why elite units kept treating each other as enemies instead of allies. Someone needed to fix it before more body bags came home. Maggie had requested this assignment specifically against the advice of her superiors at JSOC, who'd warned her that SEALs didn't play well with outsiders, especially outsiders who happened to be female, older than their commanding officers, and carrying enough classified intelligence to end careers with a single phone call. She'd insisted anyway. She always did. The mess hall operated on unwritten rules, as rigid as any military regulation. Officers sat separately from enlisted. Senior chiefs commanded the prime real estate near the windows. Junior personnel filled whatever spaces remained, grateful for scraps of recognition that filtered down from above. Women, the few stationed at Coronado, kept to their own corner, a safety measure born from bitter experience with operators who viewed them as invaders in their sacred brotherhood. Maggie had chosen a table in the corner deliberately. Good sight lines to all entrances. Back to the wall, clear fields of observation, old habits, the kind that kept you alive when complacency killed everyone else. She wore no rank insignia by design. Her civilian contractor badge identified her only as M. Brennan, JSOC Liaison. The mission required her to assess unit cohesion and leadership effectiveness without the artificial deference that came with visible authority. She needed to see these SEALs as they really were, not as they pretended to be when brass was watching. The early results were not encouraging. Lieutenant Commander Derek Stone held court at the center table like a king surveying his domain. At 38, he was everything the Navy recruitment posters promised: square-jaw shoulders that could carry democracy itself, eyes like chips of blue granite that had seen combat in places most Americans would never know existed. His men surrounded him with the devotion of disciples. SEAL Team 5, the best of the best, the tip of the spear, or so they told anyone who would listen. Another Pentagon babysitter, Stone said, his voice carrying just far enough to reach the surrounding tables. His eyes had found Maggie the moment she'd entered, tracked her to her corner table, and dismissed her as irrelevant in the space of a heartbeat. Probably here to make sure we're using the right pronouns in our after-action reports. Laughter rippled through his circle. Chief Petty Officer Ryan Kowalski leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over a chest that looked like it had been sculpted from granite. At 32, he was the team's enforcer, the one they called when someone needed an attitude adjustment. His knuckles bore the permanent discoloration of a man who'd settled too many arguments with his fists. "Want me to show her where the exit is, LT?" Kowalski's smile never reached his eyes. She looks confused. Probably thinks this is the yoga studio. More laughter. Petty Officer Second Class Miguel Torres, the team's communications specialist, was already reaching for his phone. 28 years old, MIT educated, smart enough to know better, and too desperate for acceptance to act on it. This is going to be good, Torres muttered, thumb hovering over the record button. Kowalski versus the AARP representative. Petty Officer Third Class Jason Park, the youngest, at 25, still hungry to prove he belonged, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Something about the woman in the corner bothered him. The way she sat. The way her eyes moved. The way she seemed completely unaware of the attention she was drawing while simultaneously cataloging every detail of the room. Maybe we should just leave her alone, Park said quietly. She's not bothering anyone. Kowalski's head swiveled toward him with the slow menace of a predator scenting weakness. What's the matter, Park? You worried about hurting Grandma's feelings? Park's face flushed red, but he said nothing more. He'd learned to keep his mouth shut. They all did eventually. So, Maggie continued eating with mechanical efficiency, her notebook open beside her tray. To anyone watching, she appeared completely absorbed in whatever she was writing, oblivious to the commentary, the stares, the growing tension that thickened the air like humidity before a storm. In reality, she was cataloging everything. Stone's micro-expressions when he thought no one was looking. The slight tremor in his hands, too much caffeine, or something stronger. The desperate edge beneath his confidence that spoke of a man terrified of becoming irrelevant. Kowalski's impulse control issues visible in the way his jaw tightened every time someone didn't immediately defer to his physical presence. Torres's need for validation so transparent it was almost painful to witness. Park's discomfort the only crack in an otherwise unified wall of toxic masculinity. 23 years of reading Hostels in environments where misreading someone meant death had given Maggie abilities that these men couldn't imagine. She knew Kowalski would approach before he'd consciously decided to do it. She knew exactly what would happen when he did. She also knew it was necessary. Some lessons could only be taught through pain. Kowalski stood up from his table with the practiced casualness of a man who wanted everyone to notice how casual he was being. He grabbed his tray, though he'd barely touched his food, and began walking toward the disposal area. His path took him directly past Maggie's corner table. Not a coincidence. The serving line and trash receptacles were in the opposite direction. This was a probing action, a dominance display. The kind of territorial behavior that would have been familiar to any wildlife documentary narrator. Maggie didn't look up from her notebook, didn't acknowledge his presence, didn't give him the reaction he was clearly seeking. Kowalski paused beside her table close enough that his shadow fell across her notes. He stood there for a full 5 seconds, waiting for her to notice him, to acknowledge him, to show the deference that his size and position demanded. Nothing. She kept writing. His jaw tightened. "Excuse me, ma'am." The word ma'am dripped with condescension. "I don't think we've been introduced." Maggie looked up, meeting his eyes with the kind of level stare that had made insurgent leaders reconsider their life choices. "No," she said simply. "We haven't." The silence stretched. Kowalski had expected elaboration, explanation, the nervous chatter that uncertain people used to fill uncomfortable spaces. Instead, he got 2 words and a gaze that seemed to see right through his carefully constructed intimidation. "I'm Chief Petty Officer Kowalski." He extended his hand. "SEAL Team 5. And you are..." Maggie looked at his outstretched hand for exactly 2 seconds. Long enough to be noticeable. Short enough to avoid outright rudeness. Then she returned to her notebook without accepting the gesture. "Busy," she said. The word hit Kowalski like a physical blow. Around the mess hall, conversations stuttered as SEALs tuned into the drama unfolding in the corner. This wasn't how these encounters were supposed to go. He was special operations. He was elite. He was supposed to command respect and deference, not get dismissed like some boot recruit. His face flushed red above his collar. The rational part of his brain, the part that had gotten him through buds and deployments in places that would break most men, screamed warnings that his pride refused to hear. "Look, lady." His voice dropped to a register meant to intimidate. "I don't know who you are or why you're here, but this is a naval special warfare facility. We have protocols, procedures, ways of doing things." Maggie finished writing her sentence, capped her pen with deliberate precision, and looked up at him again. This time, her expression held a hint of something that might have been amusement. "Chief," she said, her voice carrying just far enough to be heard at surrounding tables. "Do you always introduce yourself to visitors by assuming they're lost and offering to escort them off base?" It was a perfect trap. If he backed down now, he'd look weak in front of 40 witnesses. If he escalated, he'd be taking action against an unidentified individual without proper authority or justification. Either choice would reveal everything she needed to know about his judgment, his training, and his fitness for leadership. Kowalski chose escalation. His hand moved toward her shoulder, ostensibly to guide her to her feet, actually to establish physical dominance through uninvited contact. It was a move that had worked before with civilians and contractors who understood their place in the hierarchy. He had no idea that the woman sitting quietly in the corner had spent 25 years perfecting the art of violence, that her hands were classified as lethal weapons by 3 different government agencies, that touching her without permission was about to become the most expensive mistake of his military career. Maggie's eyes went cold. For just a moment, a fraction of a second that would replay in Kowalski's nightmares for years to come. He caught a glimpse of something that made his survival instincts scream. Warnings his pride refused to process. Then everything happened at once. She didn't move like other people moved. There was no wasted motion, no telegraphed intention, no warning signs that her body was about to become a weapon. One moment she was sitting quietly with her notebook. The next, she was flowing upward like water taking the shape of violence. Her left hand intercepted Kowalski's wrist with surgical precision, fingers finding the pressure point where the radial nerve surfaced just below his thumb joint. The contact lasted exactly 1 second, long enough to send white-hot agony shooting up his arm, short enough that his brain couldn't process what was happening. But that wasn't the lesson. The lesson came when Kowalski tried to pull back, tried to reassert his physical dominance through superior size and strength. Maggie let him pull, encouraged it even, used his own momentum against him in a way that turned his retreat into forward motion. Her right hand appeared at his elbow, not grabbing, just guiding, redirecting his energy along vectors that his body understood but his brain couldn't comprehend. Physics took over. Kowalski's center of gravity shifted forward, his weight committed to a direction he hadn't chosen. Maggie stepped aside like a matador avoiding a bull. And suddenly the 220-pound SEAL enforcer was airborne, his trajectory carrying him past her table toward the concrete floor with all the grace of a falling refrigerator. He hit hard, shoulder first, then hip, then the side of his face, in a sequence that sounded like someone dropping a sack of wet cement from a significant height. The silence that followed was absolute. 40 SEALs sat frozen in their chairs, forks halfway to their mouths. Conversations interrupted mid-syllable. Even the kitchen staff had stopped their clattering to stare through the serving window at the impossible sight. Ryan Kowalski, 6'2", 220 pounds of Navy SEAL muscle sprawled on the floor, while a silver-haired woman who couldn't weigh more than 140 pounds stood over him like she'd just swatted a particularly annoying fly. Kowalski rolled onto his back, blinking stars out of his vision. His right wrist hung at an angle that suggested something was very, very wrong. He tried to push himself up with his left hand, failed, tried again. His face was a mask of shock, humiliation, and dawning rage. "What the?" "Physics," Maggie said, her voice carrying clearly in the stunned silence. She hadn't even sat back down, just stood beside her table with the same relaxed posture she'd maintained throughout the entire encounter. Action-reaction. You provided the force. I just redirected it. She looked down at him with an expression that held neither anger nor satisfaction, just clinical assessment. Corpsman might want to look at that wrist. Radial nerve compression can cause temporary paralysis if left untreated. Nothing permanent. Probably. Torres's phone was recording everything. His hand was shaking so badly the footage would probably be unwatchable, but he couldn't bring himself to stop. Park had gone pale. His earlier discomfort transformed into something closer to horror as he realized they'd all just witnessed something that shouldn't have been possible. And at the center table, Lieutenant Commander Derek Stone was slowly rising from his chair, his face cycling through emotions like a slot machine that couldn't decide where to stop. Stone's boots hit the floor with deliberate weight as he approached the corner table. Around him, his SEALs straightened in their chairs, ready to back their commander's play, whatever that play might be. This was a crisis of authority. Their enforcer had been publicly humiliated by a woman old enough to be his mother. If Stone didn't restore the natural order immediately, everything they'd built, the hierarchy, the respect, the fear that kept everyone in line, would crumble. "Ma'am." Stone's voice was controlled professional, the tone of a man who'd learned to hide his emotions in environments where revealing them meant death. "I don't know who you are or what you think just happened here, but you just assaulted one of my men." Maggie met his gaze without flinching. "Your man put his hands on me without consent or authority. I responded with proportional force. Any JAG officer would classify that as justifiable self-defense." "That's not how this works." Stone moved closer, using his height advantage to loom over her. "This is my mess hall, my base, my team. You don't get to walk in here and—" "I don't get to what?" Maggie's voice didn't rise, but something in her tone made Stone stop mid-sentence. "Defend myself against unwanted physical contact. Expect basic professional courtesy from naval personnel. Assume that special operations forces can distinguish between a civilian contractor and an actual threat." She looked around the room, making eye contact with SEALs who suddenly couldn't meet her gaze. "Because from where I'm standing, the only threat in this room has been wearing a trident." The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a detonation. Stone felt his face flush, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Every instinct honed by 15 years in special operations was screaming at him to restore dominance, to remind everyone present why he commanded SEAL Team 5, to make this woman understand her place in the hierarchy. But something stopped him. Something in her eyes. The way she stood, relaxed but ready weight, distributed for instant movement in any direction. The way her hands hung at her sides, fingers slightly curved, positioned for techniques he'd only seen in classified combatives manuals. The way she looked at him like she already knew how this encounter would end, and was simply waiting for him to catch up. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice quieter now, something besides anger threading through the words. "Really?" Maggie's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Someone who's been watching your unit for the past 47 minutes, Commander. Someone who's been documenting everything I've seen. Someone who came here to assess whether SEAL Team 5 is capable of the kind of inter-service cooperation that prevents good operators from coming home in boxes." She paused, letting the implications sink in. "And so far, I'm not impressed." Sometimes. The mess hall had transformed. What had been a temple of male confidence was now a room full of men who just realized they might be standing on a trapdoor. SEALs exchanged glances, trying to calculate how much trouble they were actually in. Torres's hand moved toward his pocket, suddenly desperate to delete the video he'd been so eager to capture moments ago. Park's expression had shifted from horror to something that looked almost like hope, vindication for the discomfort he'd felt watching his teammates target an unknown woman. Kowalski had managed to get himself into a sitting position, his injured wrist cradled against his chest, his face a mask of pain and humiliation that would take months to process. Stone stood perfectly still, his tactical mind finally engaging with what his pride had been too loud to let him hear. An assessment, documentation, inter-service cooperation. The phrases clicked into place like rounds being chambered. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "if you're conducting an official evaluation, there are protocols, notifications, chain of command considerations." "There are," Maggie agreed, "and they've all been followed. Your CO was briefed. Admiral Morrison approved the methodology. The fact that you weren't informed was deliberate. She tilted her head slightly, studying him like a specimen under a microscope. We needed to see how your team behaves when they think no one important is watching. The words landed like precision strikes. Every SEAL in the room understood exactly what they'd just revealed about themselves, their unit, and their fitness for the kind of joint operations that required trust between service branches. The assessment. Stone managed his voice rough. Is it over? Maggie was quiet for a moment, long enough that hope began to wither in the chest of every man present. No, she finally said. It's just beginning. Tom. She reached into her jacket pocket and produced a slim leather wallet, opening it with the deliberate precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. The identification card inside bore official SEAL's clearance levels and a photograph that left absolutely no doubt about her identity. Margaret Brennan, she said, GS-15 Joint Special Operations Command Inspector General, 25 years, Delta Force retired, currently attached to JSOC Strategic Assessment Division conducting classified evaluation of inter-unit cooperation protocols following the Objective Valiant disaster. The silence that followed was absolute. Objective Valiant. Every operator in the room knew that name, even if they'd never say it out loud. 8 men dead in a country that would never be named, killed not by enemy action, but by the kind of inter-service rivalry that turned allies into obstacles. Stone felt his stomach drop as the full implications crashed over him like a cold wave. She wasn't just some bureaucrat checking boxes. She was here because of the disaster, because SEALs and Delta and Rangers had been so busy protecting their turf that they'd gotten each other killed, because someone had to make sure it never happened again. And his team had just spent the last hour demonstrating exactly the kind of toxic culture that had led to those body bags. Commander Stone, Maggie's voice cut through his spiraling thoughts. Your team has approximately 12 hours to demonstrate whether the behavior I've witnessed tonight is an aberration or a symptom of deeper institutional failures. She gathered her notebook and pen, tucking them into her jacket with the efficiency of someone who'd completed thousands of similar operations. Tomorrow morning, 0500, Training Area Delta, you'll have the opportunity to prove that SEAL Team 5 is capable of adaptation cooperation and professional conduct that matches your supposed elite status. She looked around the room one final time, her gaze lingering on each face long enough to make clear that she'd remember every one of them. I suggest you use the intervening hours wisely. Study your protocols, review your procedures, think very carefully about the assumptions that brought you to this moment. She paused at the edge of the center table, looking down at Stone with an expression that held neither mercy nor malice, just the cold assessment of someone who'd seen too many good operators die because their brothers in arms couldn't check their egos. Because tomorrow's exercise will be observed by Admiral Morrison JSOC leadership and representatives from every service branch affected by the Valiant disaster. Your performance will determine not just your individual futures, but whether this team continues to exist. She walked toward the exit, her footsteps the only sound in a room that had gone completely silent. At the doorway, she paused without turning around. And gentlemen, the woman you just tried to intimidate has more confirmed kills than your entire team combined. I stopped counting at 47. She disappeared through the door, leaving 40 SEALs to contemplate the wreckage of their evening and wonder if they had any future left to salvage. The mess hall remained frozen for a full 30 seconds after Maggie's departure. Then everyone started talking at once. Did she just... Delta Force, are you kidding me? We're dead. We are so dead. Kowalski, you absolute moron. Stone held up his hand, and the chaos died as quickly as it had erupted. His team looked at him with expressions ranging from panic to desperation to the hollow-eyed shock of men who'd just watched their careers evaporate. Torres. His voice was quiet, controlled, dangerous. Tell me you didn't post that video anywhere. Torres's face went pale. No, sir. I mean, I was just recording. I didn't... It's still on my phone. Delete it. Now. Torres's thumb was already moving. Yes, sir. Already done, sir. Stone turned to Kowalski, who had managed to get himself into a chair, his wrist swelling visibly as he cradled it against his chest. "Medical, now. And Kowalski?" "Sir, when they ask you how it happened, you slipped on a wet floor." "Understood." Kowalski's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Understood, sir." It was a futile gesture, Stone knew. Whatever documentation Brennan had compiled over the past 47 minutes would tell the real story. But maintaining some semblance of control, even the illusion of it, was all he had left. Park cleared his throat, drawing Stone's attention. "Sir," I tried to say something, before Kowalski approached her. "I said we should leave her alone." Stone studied the young SEAL for a long moment. Park was 25, still green, still learning the unwritten rules that govern special operations culture. But tonight, he'd been the only one whose instincts had been right. "I heard you," Stone said quietly, "and I should have listened." It was as close to an admission of fault as anyone had ever heard from Derek Stone. Around the table, SEALs exchanged glances of surprise that their commander, their unshakable, infallible commander, had just acknowledged making a mistake. "What do we do now, sir?" Torres asked. "Tomorrow's exercise. If JSOC and Admiral Morrison are going to be watching, we prepare." Stone's voice hardened with resolve. "We pull every manual on inter-service cooperation protocols. We review every after-action report from joint operations. We figure out what she wants to see and we give it to her. And if that's not enough..." The question came from Kowalski, who was being helped to his feet by two teammates. His face was gray with pain and something deeper, the first cracks appearing in an ego that had never been seriously challenged. Stone was quiet for a moment. "Then we learn," he finally said. "Whatever she's here to teach us, we learn it. Because the alternative is watching everything we've built get dismantled by someone who's better at this than we are." He looked around the room at the men who'd followed him into firefights and extraction zones and places that didn't exist on any map. "We're SEALs. We adapt. We overcome. And tomorrow we prove that what happened here tonight was a mistake, not a definition of who we are." But as his team dispersed to begin their desperate preparations, Stone couldn't shake the image of Maggie Brennan's eyes when she'd looked at him. The complete absence of doubt. The quiet certainty of someone who'd already calculated every possible outcome and found them all acceptable. She wasn't worried about tomorrow's exercise because she already knew how it would end. And somewhere deep in his gut, Derek Stone was beginning to suspect that he knew too. The night stretched ahead of them, dark and full of terrible possibilities. Somewhere on the base, a 54-year-old woman with silver-streaked hair was probably sleeping peacefully, unbothered by the chaos she'd left in her wake. Tomorrow, the real lesson would begin. And every SEAL who'd been in that mess hall was about to discover that confidence without competence was just elaborate preparation for failure. Stone didn't sleep that night. He sat in his quarters with his laptop open, fingers flying across the keyboard as he searched for any information he could find about Margaret Brennan. The name brought up almost nothing: a few citations and redacted after-action reports, a brief mention in a Joint Chiefs of Staff briefing from 2019, and exactly one photograph that looked like it had been taken in the early 2000s. The woman in that photograph was younger, her hair still dark, but those eyes were unmistakable. The same eyes that had looked at him in the mess hall like he was already dead and just hadn't realized it yet. His phone buzzed. A text from Senior Chief Morrison at Naval Special Warfare Command. "Stone, what the hell did your team do? Admiral's office called. They want a full report on the Brennan incident by 0400. You better have a good explanation." Stone stared at the message for a full minute before typing his response. "Working on it. Situation is complicated." The reply came instantly. "Complicated doesn't cover careers ending. Fix this." Stone set the phone down and rubbed his eyes with the heels of his hands. In 15 years of special operations, he'd never felt this kind of dread, the slow creeping certainty that he'd made a mistake so catastrophic that no amount of damage control could contain it. A knock at his door pulled him from his spiral. "Enter." Torres stepped inside, his face drawn and pale in the harsh fluorescent light. He was carrying a tablet computer and his hands were trembling slightly. Sir, I found something about Brennan. Stone gestured for him to continue. Torres moved to the desk and set the tablet down, pulling up a document that looked like it had been assembled from fragments of classified briefings and unofficial channels. I called in some favors, Torres said. A buddy from intelligence school who works at JSOC now. He couldn't tell me much, but he sent me this. Stone leaned forward, scanning the document. What he read made his blood run cold. The Gray Lady, Torres said quietly. That's what they called her in the sandbox. Nobody knew her real name, but everyone knew the stories. A female operator who worked with Delta did things that officially never happened in places that officially didn't exist. Stone kept reading, his jaw tightening with each line. 17 confirmed solo operations behind enemy lines. Extraction of high-value assets from locations that conventional forces couldn't reach. A kill count that was classified at levels so high that even the numbers were redacted. And one mission that stood out from all the others. Operation Crimson Dawn, 2018. Tehran. She went into Iran, Stone breathed. Alone. That's what my contact said. Torres's voice was barely above a whisper. Nobody knows exactly what she did there, but 6 months later, 3 senior members of the Revolutionary Guard were dead, and Iran's nuclear program was set back by 5 years. Stone sat back in his chair, the full weight of what they'd done finally settling on his shoulders. They hadn't just disrespected some Pentagon bureaucrat, they'd assaulted a legend. Does the rest of the team know? Torres shook his head. I came to you first, sir. I thought you should be the one to tell them. Stone was quiet for a long moment, processing the information, calculating angles, trying to find some path forward that didn't end with his entire team being scattered to the winds. Get everyone together, he finally said. Briefing room, 20 minutes. Sir, it's 01:30 hours. I don't care if it's Christmas morning, Torres, get them there. Torres nodded and disappeared through the door, leaving Stone alone with the knowledge that had just reshaped his understanding of the universe. Margaret Brennan wasn't just better than them. She was operating in a different category entirely, and tomorrow she was going to prove it. The briefing room was packed by 0200 hours. 40 SEALs sat in various states of exhaustion and anxiety, some still in PT gear, others looking like they'd been pulled from their racks mid-dream. Kowalski was there too, his right wrist wrapped in a medical brace, his face a mask of controlled fury that couldn't quite hide the fear beneath. Stone stood at the front of the room, the tablet Torres had given him, connected to the main display screen. Listen up, he said, and the murmured conversations died instantly. What I'm about to show you doesn't leave this room. Understood? 40 heads nodded. Stone pulled up the document. Her name is Margaret Brennan, 54 years old. 25 years Delta Force retired at the rank of Command Sergeant Major. Current assignment JSOC, Inspector General Strategic Assessment Division. He paused, letting that sink in. But that's just the official record. Here's what they don't put in the personnel files. The next slides showed fragments of intelligence reports, redacted mission summaries, and the call sign that had made Stone's blood run cold. The Gray Lady. The room went absolutely silent. Every operator present knew that name. It was whispered in SOF circles like a ghost story, a female operative who'd done things that male operators couldn't or wouldn't do. Infiltration operations that required a cover that no man could provide. Honey traps that ended with high-value targets dead, and intelligence agencies scrambling to figure out what had happened. And solo missions into places where sending a team would have started a war. She's real, Stone continued. She's here. And we spent 47 minutes showing her exactly why our unit needs to be disbanded. Kowalski's good hand clenched into a fist. Sir, with all due respect, save it, Chief. Stone's voice was ice. You put your hands on a woman who's killed more enemies of this country than most infantry battalions. You're lucky she decided to educate you instead of eliminate you. The words landed like physical blows. Kowalski's jaw worked, but he said nothing. Tomorrow morning, Stone continued, We're going to be evaluated by someone who knows every trick in our playbook because she helped write the damn book. Admiral Morrison will be watching, JSOC leadership will be watching, and representatives from every service branch affected by the Valiant disaster will be watching. He looked around the room, making eye contact with each man. We have 5 hours to figure out how to survive what's coming. So here's what we're going to do. The next 4 hours were the most intense preparation Stone had ever conducted. They pulled every manual on joint operations protocols. They reviewed every after-action report from combined exercises with other service branches. They ran through tactical scenarios that emphasize cooperation over competition. But more than the technical preparation, Stone forced his team to confront something they'd spent years avoiding, their own assumptions. "Park," Stone said, at 03:30 hours, pointing to the youngest SEAL. "You tried to stop Kowalski tonight. Why?" Park looked uncomfortable with the sudden attention. "I don't know, sir. Something just felt wrong." What felt wrong? The way she was sitting. Park's brow furrowed as he tried to articulate something he'd only understood instinctively. She wasn't nervous. Anyone else walking into our mess hall alone, they'd be at least a little uncomfortable. But she wasn't. She was watching, like she was taking notes on everything we did. Stone nodded slowly. "Good. That's exactly what she was doing. And we were too busy assuming she was nobody to notice that she was cataloging our weaknesses." He turned to address the whole room. "This is what we do tomorrow. We stop assuming. We start observing. We treat every unknown like a potential threat until we have verified intelligence that says otherwise." "Sir," Torres said hesitantly, "what if that's not enough? What if she's already decided to end us?" Stone was quiet for a moment. "Then we give her a reason to change her mind. We show her that we can learn from this, that what happened tonight was a wake-up call, not a death sentence." He checked his watch. 04:15 hours. 45 minutes until they needed to be in formation. Final review of tactical assignments, then gear up. Whatever happens out there, we face it together. The team dispersed to complete their preparations, leaving Stone alone with his thoughts. He'd spent 15 years building SEAL Team 5 into what he believed was the finest special operations unit in the Navy. Tonight, a 54-year-old woman with silver hair had shown him just how wrong he'd been. Tomorrow, she'd show him everything else. The pre-dawn darkness carried a different quality as Stone led his team to the parade ground. The cold was sharper, the silence more complete, the weight of what was coming pressing down on every operator like physical mass. 40 SEALs stood in perfect formation, their breath visible in the morning chill, their futures hanging on whatever Commander Margaret Brennan had planned for them. At precisely 0500 hours, 3 vehicles approached. Stone recognized the first 2 standard military sedans carrying base command staff. Colonel Harrison and Major Vance emerged, their expressions grim with the look of officers who'd been briefed on exactly how badly his team had embarrassed the naval special warfare community. The third vehicle was different, a modified Humvee that looked like it had seen actual combat, not parade ground display. The kind of vehicle that units used in environments where looking pretty was less important than staying alive. The door opened and Margaret Brennan stepped out. She was wearing full combat gear, not the ceremonial kind that officers wore for inspections, but functional equipment that showed the wear patterns of actual use. Her movements were economical, professional, and absolutely terrifying. This wasn't the woman who'd been trying to eat dinner in peace. This was a combat operator preparing to demonstrate exactly why she was considered one of the most dangerous people in American special operations. Behind the sedans, a 4th vehicle arrived that Stone hadn't been expecting, a black SUV with government plates and the kind of tinted windows that screamed classified. The door opened, and a man in his 60s emerged, tall, silver-haired, wearing a uniform that bore enough stars to make everyone present snap to even straighter attention. Admiral James Morrison, Commander Naval Special Warfare Command. Stone's heart sank. If Morrison had come personally, this wasn't just an assessment. This was an execution. "Admiral on deck," Stone called out, and his team responded with the precision of men who understood their careers were measured in hours rather than years. Morrison approached without returning salutes, his attention focused entirely on Brennan. "Maggie," he said. "Been a long time." "James." Brennan's response was casual, familiar in a way that suggested history between them. "You didn't have to come yourself." "Yes, I did." Morrison's jaw tightened. 8 good people are dead because units like this one can't check their egos long enough to work together. I need to see for myself whether these men are salvageable. He turned to look at Stone's formation, his eyes hard as granite. "Commander Stone, I've read the preliminary report from last night. Do you have anything to say?" Stone stepped forward, his voice steady despite the terror clawing at his chest. "Admiral, my team's behavior last night was inexcusable. We made assumptions based on appearance rather than verification. We failed to follow basic security protocols. And we created an environment that no professional should have to experience." He paused, gathering himself. "We have no excuses, sir. Only a request for the opportunity to demonstrate that we can learn from this failure." Morrison studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "That's exactly what Commander Brennan is here to determine." He stepped back, gesturing for Brennan to proceed. "The assessment is yours, Maggie. Show me what they're made of." Brennan moved to stand in front of the formation, her presence commanding attention without demanding it. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the morning air, "last night you showed me who you are when you think no one important is watching. Today you get to show me who you can become when you understand exactly what's at stake." She began pacing slowly along the front rank, her eyes evaluating each operator with the clinical assessment of someone who'd spent decades separating wheat from chaff. "The exercise is simple. I represent a high-value target that has been located in hostile territory. Your mission is to capture or neutralize me within 2 hours, using appropriate tactics and procedures." She stopped in front of Kowalski, who refused to meet her gaze. "You will have access to all standard equipment and support. I will be armed with simulation rounds and defensive equipment only." Her smile was cold. "The disadvantage is mine. Numerically." She resumed pacing. "The exercise area encompasses training area delta, approximately 4 square kilometers of varied terrain. You have 15 minutes to plan your operation. I will give you a 5-minute head start before beginning evasion." Stone raised his hand. "Ma'am, rules of engagement. Standard training protocols. Simulation rounds, physical contact as necessary for capture. Nothing that will cause permanent damage." She paused, and something flickered in her eyes. "I will extend you the same courtesy." "Probably." The word "probably" hung in the air like a threat. "Final question," Torres called out. "Ma'am, what happens if we fail?" Brennan's expression didn't change. "The evaluation report I submit to JSOC will recommend immediate disbandment of SEAL Team 5 with personnel redistributed to other commands. Your commanding officer will face disciplinary review for failure to maintain unit standards. And the record of your performance will become a case study in what happens when elite units forget that excellence requires humility." She checked her watch with military precision. 15 minutes, gentlemen. Use them wisely." Stone's mind raced as he gathered his team leaders around the tactical planning table. 4 square kilometers, 2 hours, one target who'd spent 25 years learning how to disappear. The odds were impossible, but impossible was what SEALs trained for. "Overlapping search grids," Stone said, marking positions on the terrain map. 3-man teams, constant communication, mutually supporting movements. Nobody operates alone. Nobody breaks radio protocol. Kowalski leaned over the map with his good hand. "Sir, she's one person. Even with her training, the numbers favor us." "The numbers didn't help you last night, Chief." Kowalski's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. "Torres, I want comms established with all teams within 5 minutes of execution. Park your running overwatch from the eastern ridge. Jackson, your team takes the central sector." He assigned positions rapidly, his tactical mind working through scenarios, even as part of him whispered that none of it would matter. She wasn't going to play by their rules. She was going to rewrite them. "Final check," Stone said. "What are we not assuming?" Park spoke up first. We're not assuming she's in the obvious hiding spots. Good. What else? We're not assuming our communications are secure, Torres added. If she's got Delta resources, she might be able to intercept or jam our frequencies. Better, keep going. We're not assuming she's trying to hide, Kowalski said slowly, his voice carrying a grudging respect that hadn't been there before. She might come to us, pick us off one by one. Stone nodded. That's exactly what she'll do, because that's what any special operator would do against a numerically superior force. She'll use our size against us, fragment our coordination, and eliminate us piece by piece. He looked around at his team leaders. So we give her what she doesn't expect. Discipline, patience, actual coordination instead of the testosterone contest she saw last night. The 15 minutes expired. Across the parade ground, Brennan had finished her own preparations. She stood alone at the edge of the training area, waiting. Stone raised his hand to signal his team's readiness. Execute. The first 30 minutes were a nightmare of shadows and paranoia. Stone's team swept through training area Delta with textbook precision, covering angles, maintaining communication, following every protocol they'd drilled for years. They found nothing. No tracks, no evidence of passage, no indication that anyone had ever entered the exercise area at all. It was as if Margaret Brennan had simply ceased to exist. Alpha Team Sector 1 clear, crackled over the radio. Bravo Team Sector 2 clear. Charlie Team Sector 3 clear. Stone stood at the tactical command post, watching his teams move across the terrain like pieces on a chessboard. A chessboard where his opponent had removed herself from the board entirely. She's not evading, he muttered. She's observing. Torres looked up from the communications console. Sir, she's watching us, learning our patterns, figuring out our weak points. Stone's gut twisted with the certainty of someone who'd suddenly realized he was prey instead of predator. When she moves, it'll be surgical. As if in answer, the radio crackled with a transmission that made every operator in the command post freeze. It was Brennan's voice. Commander Stone, your tactical deployment is textbook perfect. Unfortunately, I helped write the textbook. The transmission cut out. Then from 3 different positions, simultaneously, smoke grenades detonated, and the screaming began. Stone heard the chaos unfolding over the radio like a symphony of disaster. Contact, contact, she's in Sector 2. Charlie Team man down, repeat man down. I can't see, where is she? Where is she? He watched his tactical display as operator icons began changing from green to red, one every 30 seconds, like a heartbeat of elimination. She wasn't just evading them. She was hunting them. All teams fall back to rally point Alpha, Stone ordered, fighting to keep his voice steady. Defensive positions. Nobody moves alone. The responses that came back were fragmented, panicked. Sir, she's everywhere. I don't know how. Jensen is down. Martinez is down. She took them both before we even... How is she doing this? She's one person. Stone's hands clenched into fists as he watched his carefully planned operation disintegrate in real time. 23 operators eliminated in 47 minutes, 17 remained. And somewhere in the chaos and smoke, a 54-year-old woman was completing their education, one elimination at a time. From her position in an abandoned water tower, Brennan observed the remaining SEALs attempting to regroup. They were good. Better than she'd expected, actually. Their tactical discipline was solid. Their communication protocols were professional. Their individual skills were exactly what the Navy claimed they were. But skills weren't enough. Not against someone who'd spent 25 years learning that conventional thinking was just elaborate preparation for unconventional failure. She checked her watch. 43 minutes remaining. Time enough to finish the lesson. Brennan began her descent from the water tower, moving with the fluid silence that had made her a ghost in a dozen combat zones. Below her, Stone was trying to rally his remaining men into something resembling a coherent defensive position. He'd chosen high ground, good visibility, overlapping fields of fire, exactly what the manuals recommended, which made it exactly what she expected. The smoke grenade she'd prepared landed in the center of their position at 0617 hours. The chaos that followed was systematic, professional, and absolutely devastating. One by one, the remaining SEALs discovered that their defensive position was actually a cage, and the predator was already inside. Stone was the last one standing. He'd watched his team get dismantled with a precision that bordered on artistic. Brennan had moved through their position like smoke through fingers appearing and disappearing in ways that defied everything he understood about tactical movement. His weapon was raised, but there was nothing to aim at, just shadows and the sound of his own breathing. "Commander Stone?" Her voice came from behind him. Close enough that he should have heard her approach, close enough that he should have sensed her presence. He hadn't. "It's over," Brennan continued. "Lower your weapon." Stone's hands were steady as he complied, setting his rifle on the ground with the careful movements of someone who'd accepted defeat. He turned to face her. She stood 3 meters away, not even breathing hard. Her equipment showed no signs of the systematic elimination she'd just conducted. No scratches, no wear, no indication that she'd spent the better part of an hour hunting 40 SEALs through 4 kilometers of terrain. "How?" The word came out as a whisper. Brennan's expression softened slightly. "You're not incompetent, Commander. Your team isn't weak. You're just fighting the wrong war, with the wrong assumptions against the wrong enemy." She took a step closer. "The lesson isn't that you're failures. The lesson is that competence without understanding is just elaborate preparation for failure. You're excellent SEALs. You're just not special operations. And today you finally learned the difference." Stone stood in silence, processing the weight of complete defeat. 40 operators, 2 hours, 1 woman. The outcome had never been in doubt. Behind him, he could hear his teammates beginning to stir as they recovered from the takedowns that had removed them from the exercise. Cable ties were being cut. Equipment was being retrieved. But nobody was speaking. Because every one of them had just received an education that would reshape their understanding of warfare for the rest of their careers. And the woman who'd delivered that education was already walking toward the observation post where Admiral Morrison waited to deliver his verdict on their futures. Stone gathered his team in formation as Brennan walked toward the observation post where Admiral Morrison stood watching. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. The evidence of their defeat was written in every face, every posture, every pair of eyes that couldn't quite meet the gaze of the man beside them. 40 SEALs who'd entered the exercise, convinced of their superiority, now stood in the wreckage of that conviction, waiting to learn whether they had any future left. Kowalski had been eliminated in the first wave. His wrist brace made him clumsy slow, and Brennan had used that against him with surgical precision. He'd gone down without even seeing her approach a pressure point strike that dropped him like his strings had been cut. Torres had lasted longer, using his technical skills to track communication frequencies and predict Brennan's movement patterns. He'd been wrong about every prediction. She'd appeared behind him while he was still trying to figure out where she was, her voice calm as she informed him that his tactical display was showing him exactly what she wanted him to see. Park had surprised everyone, including himself. He'd been the only operator to actually get close to her, his instincts compensating for what his training couldn't provide. She'd taken an extra 3 seconds to neutralize him, which in special operations terms was practically a compliment. But in the end, none of it had mattered. 40 operators, 1 woman, 93 minutes. The outcome had been inevitable from the moment she'd entered that training area. Admiral Morrison approached the formation with the measured pace of a man who'd seen enough military careers end to know what it looked like. His face was unreadable. Stone snapped to attention, his team following suit with the precision of men who understood that their next few minutes would determine everything. "At ease," Morrison said, though his tone suggested there was nothing easy about what was coming. The formation relaxed slightly, though tension still crackled through the air like static electricity. Morrison turned to Brennan, who had positioned herself to the side, her expression neutral but watchful. "Commander Brennan, your assessment." Brennan stepped forward, her voice carrying clearly to every operator present. "Admiral, I've completed my evaluation of SEAL Team 5's operational readiness and inter-service cooperation capability. She paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. My findings are as follows. Stone felt his stomach drop. This was it. Tactical competence is above average. Individual skill levels meet or exceed Navy standards. Physical conditioning is excellent. Equipment maintenance is exemplary. A flicker of hope sparked in Stone's chest. Then Brennan continued. However, the unit demonstrates critical deficiencies in threat assessment, assumption verification, and inter-service cooperation protocols. The incident in the mess hall last night revealed institutional biases that compromise operational effectiveness and create hostile environments for joint operations. She looked directly at Stone. In a real-world scenario involving cooperation with other service branches, the attitudes demonstrated by this unit would result in mission failure and potential loss of life. This is not speculation. This is exactly what happened during Objective Valiant. The words landed like artillery shells. Every operator present knew about Valiant. 8 dead because units couldn't work together. 8 families destroyed because egos mattered more than mission success. My preliminary recommendation, Brennan said, is that SEAL Team 5 be placed on probationary status pending completion of mandatory inter-service integration training. Stone blinked. Probationary status. Not disbandment, not destruction. A chance. Morrison's expression didn't change. Probationary status, he repeated. Not disbandment. No, sir. Brennan's voice was firm. Disbandment would be the easy option. It would also be the wrong one. Explain. Brennan turned to address the formation, her gaze sweeping across faces that ranged from confused to hopeful to still shell-shocked. What I witnessed last night was ugly, unprofessional. Exactly the kind of institutional arrogance that gets people killed. She paused. But what I witnessed this morning was something different. Stone straightened slightly, uncertain where this was going. Commander Stone's tactical planning was sound. His team's execution was disciplined. When they realized they were outmatched, they adapted rather than doubling down on failed approaches. Brennan's expression softened almost imperceptibly. That's not nothing. That's the foundation of genuine military excellence. She turned back to Morrison. The problem isn't capability, Admiral. It's culture, and culture can be changed, if there's willingness to change it. Morrison was quiet for a long moment, studying the formation with eyes that had evaluated thousands of operators over a 30-year career. Commander Stone. Stone stepped forward. Sir? Do you understand what Commander Brennan is offering you? A second chance, sir. Wrong. Morrison's voice sharpened. She's offering you a first chance. Everything before today was prologue. The real test starts now. He looked at Brennan. You'll conduct the integration training personally. Brennan nodded. 3 days, Admiral. If they show genuine capacity for change, I'll amend my report accordingly. If they don't, she let the implication hang. Very well. Morrison addressed the formation. SEAL Team 5, you are hereby placed on probationary status, effective immediately. Commander Brennan has operational authority over your training for the next 72 hours. Her evaluation will determine whether this unit continues to exist. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Don't waste this opportunity. There won't be another one. Morrison departed 20 minutes later, leaving Brennan alone with 40 SEALs who still weren't sure whether they'd been saved or condemned to a slower destruction. Stone dismissed the formation to medical evaluation and equipment recovery, then approached Brennan with the careful bearing of a man walking through a minefield. Ma'am, I want to thank you. Don't. Brennan's voice was sharp. Don't thank me for something you haven't earned yet. Stone stopped mid-sentence, caught off guard by her intensity. What happened this morning wasn't mercy, Commander. It was investment. I've seen enough good operators destroyed by bad culture to know that punishment rarely fixes the underlying problem. Her eyes held his with uncomfortable directness. You have 72 hours to prove that investment was justified. If you fail, I will personally ensure that every man in this unit spends the rest of his career in a supply depot in Alaska." Stone swallowed hard. "Understood, ma'am." "Good." Brennan checked her watch. 1300 hours. Full team assembly briefing room 3. We begin with the hardest lesson first. "Which lesson is that, ma'am?" Brennan's smile was cold. "Accountability." The briefing room fell silent as Brennan entered at precisely 1300 hours. 40 SEALs sat in rows, their expressions ranging from wary to hostile to genuinely curious. The medical evaluations had revealed no serious injuries from the morning's exercise. Bruised egos didn't show up on x-rays, and the physical pain of elimination had faded into the deeper ache of professional humiliation. Brennan moved to the front of the room and stood in silence for 30 seconds, letting the tension build. Then she spoke. "Last night, Chief Petty Officer Kowalski put his hands on me without consent or authority. What should have happened next?" The question hung in the air. Nobody answered. "I'm not asking what did happen. I'm asking what should have happened according to every regulation, protocol, and professional standard you've been trained to follow." Still nothing. Brennan pointed at Park, the youngest operator in the room. "Petty Officer Park, you tried to stop it. What should have happened?" Park looked like he wanted to disappear, but he answered. "Someone should have verified your identity and purpose on base, ma'am. Standard security protocol. And physical contact with unidentified personnel should never be initiated without clear threat assessment. So why didn't anyone do that?" The silence stretched. "Because we made assumptions," Stone said finally, "based on your appearance, your gender, your age." Brennan nodded slowly. "Assumptions. Let's talk about those." She moved to the center of the room, forcing operators to turn in their seats to follow her. "When I walked into your mess hall, what did you see?" "A woman," someone muttered. "More specifically." "An older woman." Torres's voice was barely above a whisper. "Civilian contractor badge. No visible rank. Nobody we needed to worry about." "Nobody you needed to worry about." Brennan repeated the words with clinical precision. "A stranger enters your facility, sits alone, observes your operations for 47 minutes, and nobody thinks to question why she's there or what she wants." She stopped directly in front of Kowalski. "Chief, when you approached me, what were you trying to accomplish?" Kowalski's jaw tightened, but he answered. "I was establishing dominance, ma'am, showing you that you didn't belong in our space." "Why didn't I belong?" The question forced Kowalski to confront something he'd never had to articulate before. Because you didn't fit what we expected, what we thought a threat looked like. And what does a threat look like? Kowalski was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know anymore, ma'am." Oh. Brennan let that admission settle before continuing. 6 months ago, a Marine patrol in Syria made similar assumptions about a woman they encountered at a checkpoint. She was small, appeared unarmed, didn't match their profile of a potential threat. The room went completely still. She was wearing a suicide vest. 3 Marines died. 5 more were critically wounded. Brennan's voice hardened. The investigation found that standard identification procedures had been ignored because the Marines made assumptions based on gender stereotypes. They saw a woman, and they stopped thinking. They stopped following protocols. They stopped treating an unknown as a potential threat. She looked around the room, making eye contact with each operator in turn. "That's what happened last night. You saw a woman and you stopped thinking. The only difference is that I wasn't wearing a vest. I was carrying a notebook." Torres raised his hand hesitantly. "Ma'am, permission to speak freely." "Granted." "How do we fix this? How do we change something that we didn't even know we were doing?" Brennan's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "That's the first intelligent question I've heard since I arrived at this base." She moved back to the front of the room. "You fix it by acknowledging that you don't know what you don't know. You fix it by questioning every assumption before you act on it. You fix it by remembering that the moment you think you figured everything out is the moment you become vulnerable." She paused. "And you fix it by listening to people like Petty Officer Park, who tried to tell you something was wrong and got mocked for his trouble." Every eye in the room turned to Park, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on Earth. Park's instincts were correct. His observation skills picked up what the rest of you missed. And instead of listening, you shut him down because he was challenging the group's assumptions. Brennan pointed at Stone. Commander, what should you have done when Park expressed concern? Stone's face was tight with the effort of public self-examination. I should have listened to him, ma'am. I should have verified the situation before allowing my team to engage. Why didn't you? The silence that followed was devastating. Because I was more concerned with maintaining authority than questioning my own assumptions. The next 4 hours were the most brutal professional development session any of them had ever experienced. Brennan walked them through scenario after scenario, forcing them to confront the gaps in their thinking. She presented case studies of operations that had failed because units couldn't cooperate, intelligence that had been ignored because it came from the wrong source, warnings that had been dismissed because they challenged comfortable assumptions. By 1700 hours, the room's atmosphere had shifted. The hostility that had characterized the morning was gone, replaced by something more complex, a mixture of exhaustion, humility, and the first stirrings of genuine respect for the woman who was systematically dismantling their worldview. Break for chow, Brennan announced. 1900 hours, we begin practical exercises. The team began filing out, but Stone lingered. Ma'am, may I speak with you privately? Brennan nodded, waiting until the room had cleared. What is it? Commander Stone struggled to find the right words. I've been in special operations for 15 years. I've completed 3 combat deployments. I've earned every qualification the Navy offers. He paused. And in the last 24 hours, I've learned that I don't know anything. Brennan's expression remained neutral. That's progress. How did you know last night when you walked into the mess hall? How did you know what would happen? Because I've seen it happen before. Different base, different unit, same pattern. Brennan's voice carried a weight that suggested years of similar experiences. Men who've been told they're the best start believing they can identify threats by looking at them. They stop following protocols because they think their instincts are infallible, and eventually someone gets hurt. Stone shook his head slowly. We could have killed you. If you'd been what we assumed, just some contractor who got in Kowalski's way, he might have really hurt you. He tried to hurt me, Commander. He just failed. The words landed with uncomfortable precision. But that's not what keeps me up at night, Brennan continued. What keeps me up at night is thinking about the people who can't defend themselves. The female officers who walk into spaces like your mess hall and face the same hostility I did, but don't have 25 years of Delta training to fall back on. Her eyes met Stone's with uncomfortable directness. You're not just protecting your country, Commander. You're modeling behavior for everyone under your command. When you allow men like Kowalski to intimidate women without consequence, you're telling every young operator in your unit that it's acceptable, that it's normal, that it's part of being a SEAL. Stone felt something shift in his chest. I never thought about it that way. I know you didn't. Brennan's voice softened slightly. That's why we're having this conversation. The evening practical exercises were designed to reinforce the day's lessons through experience rather than lecture. Brennan divided the team into mixed groups, deliberately pairing operators who demonstrated the worst biases with those who'd shown potential for growth. Park found himself leading a fire team that included Kowalski, an arrangement that would have been unthinkable 24 hours earlier. The scenario is simple, Brennan explained. You'll be given intelligence about a target location. Some of that intelligence will be accurate. Some will be deliberately misleading. Your job is to identify which is which before you commit to action. She handed Stone a folder. The twist is that your intelligence analyst will be someone you've never worked with before, someone from outside your community. The door to the briefing room opened, and a young woman walked in wearing Navy utilities with intelligence specialist insignia. She looked barely old enough to vote, let alone provide tactical intelligence to SEAL operators. This is Petty Officer Second Class Jennifer Walsh, Brennan said. She's one of the finest intelligence analysts at Coronado. She's also been repeatedly passed over for joint operation assignments because unit commanders don't trust her assessments. Walsh stood at attention. Her expression carefully neutral, but Stone could see the tension in her shoulders. She'd walked into hostile territory before, maybe not combat zones, but mess halls and briefing rooms where her expertise was dismissed before she opened her mouth. Petty Officer Walsh will provide your intelligence brief, Brennan continued. Your job is to listen to what she tells you, evaluate it objectively, and make tactical decisions based on the information rather than the source. She looked around the room. Can you do that? The first 15 minutes were painful to watch. Operators who would have hung on every word from a male intelligence officer kept interrupting Walsh, second-guessing her assessments, demanding to know where her information came from. Brennan observed in silence, letting them fail. The mission simulation went badly. The team made entry on a location that Walsh had correctly identified as a trap, ignoring her warnings because they didn't trust her judgment. Exercise terminated, Brennan announced. All personnel captured or killed. Stone stood in the center of the simulated kill zone, surrounded by the red markers that indicated his team's elimination. What happened, Commander? We ignored the intelligence assessment, ma'am. Why? Stone glanced at Walsh, who stood at the edge of the room with her arms crossed and her expression carefully blank. Because we didn't believe her. Did she give you bad information? No, ma'am. Her assessment was accurate. We didn't trust it. Brennan walked to stand directly in front of Stone. And if she'd been a male senior chief with gray hair and combat ribbons on his chest, would you have trusted his assessment? The silence answered the question. Reset, Brennan ordered. Run it again. This time try listening. It took 3 more iterations before the team completed the exercise successfully. By the end, Walsh had earned something she'd never received from SEAL operators before: genuine respect, based on demonstrated competence rather than assumptions about what she could or couldn't do. Petty Officer Walsh, Brennan said as the final debrief concluded your assessment. Walsh looked surprised to be asked, but she answered without hesitation. The team showed significant improvement in their willingness to evaluate intelligence objectively. Commander Stone in particular demonstrated strong leadership by acknowledging when his initial assumptions were wrong and adjusting tactics accordingly. She paused, glancing at Kowalski. Chief Kowalski was the last to adapt, but by the 4th iteration he was actively incorporating my assessments into his tactical decisions. That's progress. Kowalski's jaw tightened, but he nodded slightly, the closest thing to acknowledgement Walsh had ever received from him. Thank you, Petty Officer. Brennan dismissed Walsh, then turned to address the team. Tomorrow we increase the difficulty. You'll be working with operators from other service branches, Army, Air Force, Marine Corps. People you've spent your careers competing against rather than cooperating with. She let that sink in. The question is whether what you learned today will survive contact with your deepest prejudices. Some of you have spent years believing that SEALs are superior to every other military unit. Tomorrow, you'll have the opportunity to prove whether that belief helps or hurts your mission effectiveness. Stone raised his hand. Ma'am, what happens if we fail? Brennan's expression was unreadable. Then I'll know that tonight's progress was performance rather than transformation, and my report will reflect that. She checked her watch. 0500, training area Delta. Get some sleep, gentlemen. Tomorrow determines everything. Stone didn't sleep again that night. But this time it wasn't fear that kept him awake. It was the beginning of understanding. He sat in his quarters replaying the day's events, examining his own reactions and assumptions with the kind of ruthless honesty he usually reserved for tactical after-action reviews. The woman he'd dismissed as a bureaucrat 24 hours ago had shown him something he'd never wanted to see: the gap between who he thought he was and who he actually was. It wasn't comfortable. But it was necessary. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Enter. Kowalski stepped inside, still wearing his wrist brace, his expression a complicated mixture of emotions that Stone had never seen on his enforcer's face before. Sir, permission to speak freely. Granted. Kowalski was quiet for a moment, struggling to find words. I've been in the Navy for 12 years. I've done things I'm proud of and things I'm not, but I've never... He stopped, started again. I've never had to look at myself the way she made me look at myself today. Stone nodded slowly. I know what you mean. When I grabbed her in the mess hall, I thought I was being strong. I thought I was defending our territory, showing her that she didn't belong. Kowalski's voice cracked slightly. She could have destroyed me. Not just my career destroyed me, and instead, she gave me a chance to learn. She gave all of us that chance. Why? The question came out raw, confused. After what we did to her, why would she give us anything? Stone was quiet for a long moment. Because she's not trying to punish us, Chief. She's trying to make us better. And you can't make someone better by destroying them. Kowalski stood in silence, processing that. I'm going to apologize to her, sir. Properly. And I'm going to mean it. I think she'd appreciate that. Kowalski turned to leave, then stopped at the door. Sir, for what it's worth, I'm glad she beat us. We needed it. The door closed behind him, leaving Stone alone with the growing certainty that something fundamental was shifting in his team. Whether it would be enough remained to be seen. But for the first time since Brennan had walked into their mess hall, Derek Stone felt something that might have been hope. Day 2 began with a shock that nobody expected. Stone had assembled his team at 0500 as ordered, 40 SEALs standing in formation with the grim determination of men who understood their futures hung by threads. They expected Brennan. They expected another brutal evaluation. What they got was something far more challenging. 3 military buses pulled into Training Area Delta, and the men who stepped off them represented everything SEAL Team 5 had spent years believing they were superior to. Army Rangers in their tan berets, Marine Force Recon in their distinct utilities, Air Force Pararescue in their maroon headgear, 60 operators from competing service branches, all looking at the SEALs with expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. Stone felt his stomach tighten. This wasn't training. This was a trial by fire. Brennan emerged from the command vehicle and walked to the center of the assembly area, where 100 operators now stood in separate formations, eyeing each other like rival predators forced to share territory. Gentlemen, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the distance, welcome to the most important exercise of your careers. She gestured to the mixed formations. For the next 48 hours, you will conduct joint operations as integrated units. SEALs will work alongside Rangers. Marines will coordinate with Air Force PJs. You will share intelligence resources and tactical responsibility. Murmurs rippled through all 4 formations. Brennan's expression hardened. I've heard the jokes you tell about each other. I've seen the rivalries that turn joint operations into turf wars. I've watched good operators die because units like yours couldn't put mission success above inter-service competition. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. 8 people died during Objective Valiant. Not because they lacked skill, not because they faced an overwhelming enemy. They died because the units involved spent more time protecting their egos than protecting each other. The murmurs stopped. Today, you prove that you've learned something from their deaths. Or you prove that you haven't. The first integration exercise was designed to expose exactly the failures Brennan had described. Stone found himself assigned to lead a mixed fire team that included 2 Rangers, a Marine sniper, and an Air Force combat controller. His SEALs, Kowalski, Torres, and Park, rounded out the 8-man element. The mission brief was straightforward, secure: a compound extract a high-value target exfiltrate to a designated recovery point. Simple on paper, impossible in practice when half your team didn't trust the other half. Commander Stone. The voice belonged to Army Captain Marcus Webb, a Ranger officer with enough combat ribbons to indicate he'd earned his place at the table. I've heard a lot about SEAL Team 5 in the last 24 hours. Stone met his gaze steadily. I imagine you have. The woman your chief grabbed in the mess hall. Webb's expression was unreadable. She extracted my brother from a POW camp in 2019. Solo operation. He's alive because of her. Stone felt the words land like physical blows. I didn't know that. Nobody knows anything about what she's done, that's the point. Webb moved closer, his voice dropping. When I heard what your team did, I wanted to come down here and teach you a lesson myself. But she asked us to give you a chance. Why would she do that? Because she believes people can change. Webb's jaw tightened. I'm not as optimistic. Prove her right, Commander. For your sake and ours. The exercise began at 0700. Within 30 minutes, everything fell apart. Stone's SEALs moved in their practiced patterns fast and efficient, but completely disconnected from the Rangers and Marines who operated using different protocols and communication systems. The Air Force combat controller tried to coordinate air support, but his requests got lost in the chaos of 4 units that had never trained together. Brennan watched from the observation post as the mission collapsed in slow motion. Target compound is 200 meters ahead, Torres reported over the radio. SEALs are in position for breach. Negative on breach, Webb's voice crackled back. Ranger element is still maneuvering. You'll hit the objective without flank security. We don't need flank security. We can clear the compound in 60 seconds. That's not the mission, Torres. The mission is coordinated action. The mission is target extraction. How we do it doesn't matter. Stone cut in before the argument could escalate. Torres, hold position. Webb, how long until your element is set? 3 minutes. 3 minutes in an operation where seconds mattered. Stone could feel his SEALs bristling at the delay, their instincts screaming to move to act, to prove their superiority. But he'd learned something in the last 48 hours. All elements hold position until Captain Webb confirms ready status. We move together, or we don't move at all. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken objection. But nobody challenged the order. The coordinated breach went smoothly once all elements were in position. SEALs cleared the primary structure while Rangers secured the perimeter. The Marine sniper provided overwatch that prevented an ambush the SEALs would have walked into if they'd moved alone. The Air Force combat controller called in simulated air support that neutralized a vehicle-mounted threat. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't fast, but it worked. Target secured, Stone reported. Preparing for exfil. Brennan's voice came over the command frequency. Well done. Now here's where it gets interesting. The scenario shifted without warning. What had been a simple extraction became a running firefight as simulated enemy reinforcements arrived from 3 directions. The compound that had been secure moments ago became a death trap. We need to move, Kowalski shouted. Now. Which direction? Webb demanded. My element has the eastern route covered, but we're taking fire from the north. Marine sniper, can you suppress the northern approach? Negative. I'm pinned down. Need someone to draw their fire. The situation was deteriorating by the second. Stone could feel the old instincts surging, take control, issue orders, let the SEALs do what SEALs did best. But that wasn't the lesson. Webb, I need your tactical assessment. You've got eyes on more of the battlefield than I do. The request surprised everyone, including Webb. There's a drainage ditch running southeast, Webb said after a moment. It's not on the maps, but my point man spotted it during approach. We can use it for covered exfil if your SEALs provide suppressive fire while we move. Can you take the package? Affirmative. Stone made the decision in a heartbeat. Rangers take the target. SEALs provide cover. Marines maintain overwatch. PJ coordinates extraction point. Execute. It went against every instinct he'd developed in 15 years of special operations. SEALs didn't hand off targets to Army. SEALs completed the mission themselves. But Stone was learning that mission success mattered more than who got the credit. The extraction succeeded. Not cleanly, not perfectly, but successfully. The high-value target reached the recovery point with all operators accounted for, and the after-action review revealed something that surprised everyone present. Best inter-service coordination I've seen in 3 years of evaluation exercises. The assessment came from Colonel Harrison, who had observed the operation from the command post alongside Brennan and Admiral Morrison. The initial approach was rocky, Harrison continued. But once Commander Stone made the decision to defer tactical control to Captain Webb's assessment, the operation transformed. That's not easy for any unit commander to do, especially in front of his own men. Morrison nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. Commander Brennan, your evaluation. Brennan stepped forward, her gaze moving across the assembled operators from all 4 service branches. What I witnessed this morning was a unit in transition. The old patterns are still there, the competition, the ego, the instinct to prove superiority. But there's something else now. A willingness to question those patterns. A recognition that maybe, just maybe, the other guy might know something you don't. She stopped in front of Stone. "Commander, when you deferred to Captain Webb's tactical assessment, what were you thinking?" Stone considered the question carefully. "I was thinking that he had better situational awareness than I did, that his solution would work, that the mission mattered more than who got credit for completing it. And 6 months ago, before Valiant," Stone's jaw tightened. "6 months ago, I would have insisted on doing it the SEAL way, even if it got people killed." The admission hung in the air, raw and uncomfortable and absolutely necessary. "That's growth," Brennan said. "That's what transformation looks like. Not the absence of ego, but the ability to recognize when ego is getting in the way of the mission." She addressed the full assembly. "This afternoon's exercise will be harder. You'll be forced to trust each other in ways that go against everything you've been trained to believe. Some of you will fail. Some of you will surprise yourselves with what you're capable of becoming." Her voice hardened. "But one thing is certain, the operators who leave this training area tomorrow will not be the same ones who arrived today. The only question is whether the change will be for better or worse." So, the afternoon exercise shattered everything Stone thought he knew about joint operations. Brennan had designed a scenario that required absolute trust between service branches, a hostage rescue where failure of any single element meant mission collapse. SEALs had to rely on Ranger reconnaissance. Marines had to follow Air Force tactical coordination. Every ego, every rivalry, every years of competitive conditioning had to be suppressed in service of a common objective. The first 3 attempts failed catastrophically. Units fell back on their ingrained patterns, competing rather than cooperating, and simulated hostages died while operators argued about approach vectors and breach authority. By 1600 hours, frustration had reached a boiling point. "This is impossible," Kowalski growled during a break. "We're supposed to trust people we've never worked with to do their jobs while we do ours. That's not how real operations work." "That's exactly how real operations work." The voice came from behind them. Brennan had approached without anyone noticing, which should have stopped surprising Stone by now, but somehow still did. "Chief Kowalski, do you know how Objective Valiant failed?" Kowalski's jaw tightened. "Units didn't coordinate effectively." "More specifically." "I don't know the details, ma'am." Brennan's expression was unreadable. A SEAL element identified the target location. Proper protocol required them to share that intelligence with the Ranger unit, providing perimeter security. Instead, the SEAL team leader decided to move on the objective alone, convinced that sharing the credit would diminish the achievement. She paused. The Rangers had information about a secondary threat that the SEALs didn't know about. An ambush position that their reconnaissance had identified hours earlier. If the SEAL team leader had coordinated, he would have known. The silence stretched. He didn't coordinate. He led his team into an ambush that shouldn't have existed. 5 SEALs and 3 Rangers died because one man valued credit over cooperation. Brennan looked directly at Kowalski. That SEAL team leader survived. He has to live with the knowledge that his ego killed 8 people. Is that the kind of operator you want to be, Chief? Kowalski's face had gone pale. "No, ma'am." "Then stop treating this like a competition and start treating it like what it actually is. Preparation for the day when your ego might kill someone you care about." The 4th attempt succeeded. Not because the operators had become better friends or suddenly trusted each other completely, but because they'd finally understood what Brennan had been trying to teach them. Trust wasn't a feeling. Trust was a decision. A decision to believe that the person beside you, regardless of their uniform, their branch, their history, was committed to the same objective you were. A decision to subordinate ego to mission. A decision to recognize that you couldn't do everything alone. Stone watched his SEALs work alongside Rangers and Marines with a cooperation that would have seemed impossible 48 hours earlier. Kowalski deferred to a Ranger team leader's assessment without argument. Torres shared intelligence without trying to control how it was used. Park coordinated with an Air Force combat controller like they'd been training together for years. It wasn't perfect. It was progress. And sometimes, progress was enough. Now, That evening, Brennan gathered all 100 operators for a debrief that would become legendary in special operations circles. "What you accomplished today shouldn't have been possible," she said. 4 units that have spent years competing against each other, treating each other as rivals rather than allies, somehow managed to function as a single integrated force. She looked around the assembly, her gaze touching on faces that were tired, frustrated, but also showing something that hadn't been there that morning. Pride. Real pride, born from genuine accomplishment, rather than assumed superiority. Tomorrow is the final evaluation. Everything you've learned, everything you've experienced, will be tested in a scenario designed to break you. Some of you will fail. That's expected. What matters is how you fail. She paused. Do you fail as individuals protecting your egos at the expense of the mission? Or do you fail as a team going down together because you tried to lift each other up? Stone raised his hand. Ma'am, you keep talking about failure. Is success not an option? Brennan's smile was cold. Commander, the scenario I've designed has a 12% success rate across all previous iterations. The best units in the world have failed it. Navy SEALs, Delta Force, British SAS, Israeli Sayeret. She let that sink in. Success isn't the point. The point is showing me what you're made of when success isn't possible. That's when character reveals itself. That's when I'll know whether this training changed anything, or whether you'll revert to your old patterns the moment pressure is applied. The silence that followed was absolute. Rest well, gentlemen. Tomorrow we find out who you really are. Stone didn't try to sleep that night. Instead, he found himself walking the perimeter of Training Area Delta, processing everything that had happened in the past 72 hours. 3 days ago, he'd been the commander of what he believed was an elite special operations unit. Men who were the best at what they did, who answered to no one, who believed their training and capability made them superior to everyone around them. Now he understood how wrong he'd been. Not about his team's capability. They were still excellent operators, skilled and dedicated and willing to do whatever the mission required. But about what capability actually meant. It wasn't enough to be good at violence. It wasn't enough to complete missions successfully. Real excellence required something harder than physical skill or tactical knowledge. It required humility. The willingness to acknowledge that you didn't know everything, that other people might have something to teach you, that your assumptions about the world might be wrong. A figure approached from the darkness. Stone's hand moved toward his sidearm before his brain registered who it was. Brennan. Couldn't sleep either, she said, falling into step beside him. No, ma'am. They walked in silence for a while, the only sound their footsteps on the packed dirt. Commander, do you know why I do this work? The question surprised Stone. I assumed it was because someone had to. Someone does, but that's not why I do it. Brennan stopped walking, turning to face him in the darkness. I do it because I've seen what happens when units fail to work together. I've held dying operators in my arms and listened to them ask why nobody came to help them. Her voice cracked slightly. I've written letters to families explaining that their husband, their father, their son died because the people who were supposed to support him were too busy protecting their territory to do their jobs. Stone felt something shift in his chest. Valiant wasn't the first time. No, it was just the one that finally made leadership pay attention. Brennan's expression hardened. 8 bodies tend to concentrate the mind in ways that memos and reports don't. Is that why you gave us a chance instead of just recommending disbandment? Brennan was quiet for a long moment. I gave you a chance because I saw something in your team that I haven't seen in a lot of units I've evaluated. The capacity for change. She looked at him directly. When I walked into your mess hall, I expected exactly what I got. Arrogance, hostility, the assumption that I was nobody because I didn't fit your image of someone important. And we delivered. You did. Spectacularly. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. But then something happened that I didn't expect. When you realized how badly you'd failed, you didn't make excuses. You didn't try to minimize what happened or shift blame to others. You looked at yourself honestly and asked how you could be better. Stone remembered that conversation in his quarters. The long night of self-examination that had felt like surgery without anesthesia. That's rare, Commander. Ego is the last thing most operators are willing to sacrifice. The fact that you were willing to sacrifice yours and push your men to do the same told me that maybe, just maybe, there was something worth saving here. She started walking again, and Stone fell into step beside her. Tomorrow's exercise isn't really about success or failure. It's about showing me that the changes I've seen are real, that they'll hold up under pressure, that when the mission goes sideways, and it will go sideways, your team will reach for cooperation instead of competition. And if we don't, then I'll know that this week was theater, performance for my benefit, and my report will reflect that. Stone nodded slowly. We won't let you down, ma'am. Brennan stopped walking and turned to face him. Don't do it for me, Commander. Do it for the 8 people who died because units like yours couldn't get out of their own way. Do it for all the operators who will die in the future if this kind of training doesn't become standard across the special operations community. Her eyes held his in the darkness. Do it because it's right, not because someone's watching. She walked away, leaving Stone alone with the weight of everything she'd said. Tomorrow would determine everything. And for the first time in his career, Derek Stone understood that success wasn't measured in completed missions or enemy kills. It was measured in the lives of the people standing beside you. The final exercise began at 0400 hours under a sky that hadn't yet decided whether to offer light or keep its secrets. 100 operators stood in integrated formations, the boundaries between service branches deliberately blurred by Brennan's reorganization. SEALs stood shoulder to shoulder with Rangers. Marines coordinated with Air Force PJs. The rivalries that had defined their careers meant nothing here. Only the mission mattered. Brennan faced them with the bearing of someone who had done this 100 times before and never stopped caring about the outcome. The scenario is as follows. A joint special operations element has been ambushed during a classified mission. 12 operators are trapped in hostile territory with dwindling ammunition, multiple casualties, and no extraction timeline. Your objective is to reach them, establish a defensive perimeter, treat the wounded, and coordinate extraction. Since she paused, letting the weight settle. The catch is that you won't know which operators are trapped until you reach the objective. They could be SEALs, Rangers, Marines, Air Force. The question is whether that will affect how hard you fight to save them. Stone felt the words land in his chest. This wasn't a test of capability. This was a test of character. You have 8 hours, Brennan continued. At the end of that time, every operator who reaches the extraction point alive will be evaluated. Every operator who doesn't will be listed as a training casualty. She looked across the assembled faces. 8 hours, gentlemen. Show me who you really are. The first 2 hours were brutal. Stone led a mixed element through terrain that seemed specifically designed to break them. Every advantage they tried to exploit became a trap. Every shortcut led to ambush positions. Every moment of hesitation cost them ground they couldn't afford to lose. Kowalski moved at Stone's right shoulder, his injured wrist forgotten in the intensity of the operation. The man who had grabbed Brennan in the mess hall 4 days ago was gone, replaced by someone harder, more focused, stripped of the arrogance that had nearly destroyed his career. Contact front, Torres called over the radio. Heavy resistance. We're pinned. Stone assessed the situation in seconds. Torres's element was caught in a crossfire that would shred them if they tried to advance. The obvious solution was to go around, find another route, abandon the position to avoid casualties. But abandoning Torres meant abandoning the mission timeline. And abandoning the timeline meant the trapped operators wouldn't survive. Webb, I need your Rangers to flank left, draw their fire while we push through the center. That's a suicide run, Commander. We'll lose half my element. Do you trust me? The question hung in the air for 3 heartbeats. Yeah, Webb said finally. I trust you. Then trust that I won't waste your people. Flank left, draw their fire, but don't engage directly. I just need them looking the wrong direction for 30 seconds. Webb was quiet for a moment. 30 seconds. Don't make me regret this. The flanking maneuver worked. Webb's Rangers drew the simulated enemy attention while Stone led his SEALs through a gap that shouldn't have existed. They broke through the kill zone with minimal casualties, linking up with Torres's element and pushing toward the objective. But the success came at a cost. 2 Rangers had been tagged as casualties during the distraction. Webb knelt beside their marked positions, his expression tight with a frustration that Stone recognized all too well. "They'll be fine," Stone said. "It's training." "I know." Webb stood up, checking his weapon with mechanical precision. "But in a real operation, those would be my people, my responsibility. That's why we're here. So when it's real, we do it better." Webb looked at him for a long moment. 3 days ago, I wanted to kill you for what your team did to Brennan. I know. Now I'm following you into a simulated war zone and trusting you with my Rangers' lives." Webb shook his head slowly. "People can change. I didn't believe that before." "Neither did I." They moved out together, SEAL and Ranger, pushing toward an objective that would test everything they'd learned and everything they'd become. The trapped operators were exactly where the intelligence had indicated, but nothing else was what Stone expected. The 12 personnel pinned down in the defensive position weren't random training casualties. They were real operators, men and women Stone recognized from different units, different branches, different eras of special operations. And at the center of the position, coordinating the defense with the calm precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before, stood Margaret Brennan. Stone felt his heart stop. "She's the package," he breathed. "She's been the package the whole time." The realization hit everyone simultaneously. The woman who'd been evaluating them, teaching them, breaking them down, and building them back up, she'd placed herself in the center of the most dangerous position in the entire exercise. If they failed, she would be listed as a training casualty. Brennan looked up as Stone's element approached, and something flickered in her expression. Recognition. Evaluation. The clinical assessment of someone who was about to learn whether her investment had been justified. "Commander Stone, took you long enough." "We had some obstacles, ma'am." "I know, I designed them." She gestured to the wounded operators around her. "We have 4 critical, 3 moderate, 5 ambulatory. Extraction point is 3 kilometers east. Enemy reinforcements are inbound." Stone processed the tactical situation in seconds. "How long until they arrive?" 47 minutes. It wasn't enough time. Even with 100 operators moving 12 casualties across 3 kilometers of hostile terrain in 47 minutes was borderline impossible. Unless they worked together. Unless they trusted each other completely. Unless everything they'd learned in the past 4 days actually meant something. "All elements," Stone said into his radio, "converge on my position. We're getting everyone out. No one gets left behind." The extraction became a masterclass in what joint operations could achieve when ego stepped aside. SEALs carried wounded Rangers. Marines provided security for Air Force medics. Every service branch worked in perfect concert, their differences meaningless in the face of a common objective. Stone found himself working alongside Kowalski to transport a wounded Marine sniper whose leg had been tagged as a simulated fracture. The weight was brutal, the terrain unforgiving, but neither man complained or slowed. "Chief," Stone said between labored breaths, "when this is over, I want you to know something." "Sir, what happened in the mess hall, the way you treated Brennan, I should have stopped it before it started. I saw the same assumptions you made, and I didn't question them." Kowalski was quiet for a moment. "We all made those assumptions, sir. But I'm the commander. My job is to see what everyone else misses, to question what everyone else accepts." Stone adjusted his grip on the wounded operator. "I failed at that job, and I won't fail again." "Neither will I, sir." They pushed forward together, SEAL Commander and SEAL Enforcer, united by something stronger than rank or rivalry. The shared understanding that their assumptions had almost destroyed them, and the shared commitment to never let that happen again. Enemy contact came at the 30-minute mark. The simulated reinforcements hit their column from 2 directions, simultaneously threatening to split their formation and isolate the casualty carriers. Chaos erupted as operators scrambled to establish defensive positions while protecting the wounded. "We're going to lose people," Webb shouted over the gunfire. "We can't hold this." "We hold it," Stone shouted back. "We hold it until everyone is through." The next 12 minutes were the longest of Stone's career. He watched operators from 4 different service branches stand shoulder to shoulder against impossible odds. SEALs provided suppressive fire while Rangers dragged casualties to cover. Marines flanked the enemy position while Air Force PJs kept wounded operators stable under fire. There was no competition, no ego, no concern about who got credit for what. Just 100 people fighting as one unit, protecting each other with everything they had. And at the center of it all, moving between positions, coordinating response, keeping everyone focused on the objective, was Margaret Brennan, the woman they'd dismissed as a Pentagon bureaucrat, the woman they'd tried to intimidate, the woman who was now risking her own safety to ensure that every operator under her command made it to extraction. The extraction point appeared at minute 43, 4 minutes to spare. Stone's element was the last to arrive, carrying the final wounded operator between them. His arms burned, his legs screamed, every muscle in his body begged for rest. But they'd made it. All 100 operators, all 12 casualties, everyone accounted for. Stone lowered the wounded Marine to the ground and looked around at the people who'd made it happen. SEALs and Rangers and Marines and Air Force all collapsed together in exhausted triumph. No one cared about service branches, no one cared about rivalries. They'd survived together. That was all that mattered. Brennan walked through the extraction point, checking on wounded personnel, offering words of encouragement to exhausted operators. When she reached Stone, she stopped. "Commander." "Ma'am." "Your element's performance during the final engagement exceeded expectations, particularly your decision to hold the defensive line while the casualty bearers moved through." Stone nodded slowly, too tired for formal responses. "We weren't going to leave anyone behind." "I know." Brennan's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "That's why you passed." The debrief took place 3 hours later after medical evaluations and equipment recovery, and the slow process of coming down from operational intensity. Admiral Morrison had returned for the final assessment, his expression unreadable as Brennan delivered her report. "Based on my evaluation of SEAL Team 5 over the past 72 hours, she said, I am amending my preliminary recommendation. The unit should be removed from probationary status and returned to full operational readiness." Stone felt something release in his chest that he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Furthermore," Brennan continued, "I recommend that Commander Stone be designated as a lead instructor for the new Joint Special Operations Integration Program. His demonstrated ability to subordinate ego to mission effectiveness makes him uniquely qualified to teach other unit commanders." Morrison nodded slowly. "Commander Stone, do you accept this assignment?" Stone looked at his team. At Kowalski, who'd transformed from antagonist to advocate. At Torres, who'd learned that intelligence could come from anywhere. At Park, who'd proven that instinct sometimes mattered more than experience. "Yes, sir, I accept." "Very well." Morrison turned to address the assembled operators. "What happened here this week will become a model for inter-service cooperation across the special operations community. The lessons you've learned, the transformation you've demonstrated will save lives for decades to come." He paused, his expression hardening. "But don't mistake this for an ending. This is a beginning. The work continues every day, in every operation, in every interaction with fellow operators, regardless of their service branch. The moment you forget what you learned here is the moment you become the problem again." His gaze swept across the formation. "Dismissed." Demo. Stone found Brennan 30 minutes later standing alone at the edge of Training Area Delta. "Ma'am, may I have a moment?" Brennan turned, her expression neutral but not unwelcoming. "Commander, I wanted to thank you, not just for the second chance, but for—" he struggled to find the right words, "for showing us what we couldn't see about ourselves. That's my job." "No." Stone shook his head. "Your job is to evaluate units and write reports. What you did here was something different. You invested in us. You believed we could change when we hadn't given you any reason to believe that." Brennan was quiet for a long moment. "Do you know why I came to Coronado personally, Commander? Why I didn't just send a representative to conduct the evaluation? No, ma'am. Because of Objective Valiant. Because of the 8 people who died." Her voice carried a weight that spoke of personal connection. "One of them was my nephew, 26 years old, Army Ranger, killed because a SEAL team leader decided that coordination was less important than credit." Stone felt the words hit him like physical blows. "I didn't know. Nobody knows. I requested the assignment be classified to avoid accusations of bias." Brennan's expression hardened. "But every time I evaluate a unit like yours, every time I see the arrogance and the ego and the assumption that other service branches don't matter, I see Michael's face. I hear his voice asking why nobody came to help him." Her eyes met Stone's with uncomfortable intensity. "That's why I do this, Commander. Not for reports or evaluations or career advancement. I do it because somewhere right now, there's another 26-year-old operator whose life depends on whether the people around him can put ego aside and work together." Stone stood in silence, processing the weight of what she'd shared. "I'm sorry about your nephew. Don't be sorry. Be different." Brennan's voice softened. "What happened to Michael can't be undone, but what happens to the next operator in his position that's still being written? You have the power to change that story, Commander. You and everyone you train from this point forward." She extended her hand. "Make his death mean something. That's all I ask." Stone took her hand, feeling the calluses and scars that spoke of decades of service most people would never know about. "I will, ma'am. I promise." 3 months later, Stone stood in front of a new class of Special Operations personnel representatives from every service branch gathered for the first iteration of the Joint Integration Program. The room was filled with the same kind of arrogance he recognized from his own team 3 months ago. The same assumptions, the same certainties that would crumble the moment they faced real pressure. "Welcome to integration training," he said. "Over the next 72 hours, everything you think you know about special operations is going to be tested. Some of you will fail. Some of you will surprise yourselves. All of you will be changed." A hand went up in the back row. A young SEAL petty officer with the swagger of someone who'd never been truly humbled. "Sir, with respect, what makes you qualified to teach this course? You're a SEAL. Why should Rangers and Marines listen to SEAL doctrine?" Stone smiled. It was the same question he would have asked 3 months ago. "Because I'm not teaching SEAL doctrine, petty officer. I'm teaching something I learned from a 54-year-old woman who dismantled my entire team in 43 minutes and then showed us how to become something better than we'd ever been." He looked around the room. "Her name is Margaret Brennan. Some of you may have heard of her. Most of you haven't. But by the end of this week, you'll understand why she's one of the most important people in special operations and why the lessons she taught me might save your life someday." The arrogance in the room faltered slightly. "Now," Stone continued, "let's begin with the hardest lesson, the one about assumptions." In an office at JSOC headquarters, Margaret Brennan reviewed the evaluation reports from Stone's first training cycle. The results were better than she'd expected. Unit cooperation scores had improved 37% across all participating elements. Inter-service friction incidents had dropped by half. Most importantly, the operational effectiveness of joint teams had increased by margins that made the statisticians double-check their calculations. Change was possible. She'd proven it at Coronado. Stone was proving it now with every class he taught. And somewhere in training areas and mess halls and briefing rooms across the military, the ripples were spreading. The next generation of operators was learning that strength didn't come from dominance or competition. It came from the willingness to trust people who were different from you, to question your own assumptions, to recognize that the person standing beside you might know something you didn't. Brennan closed the report and looked at the photograph on her desk. Michael in his army dress uniform, smiling at the camera with the confidence of a young man who believed he was invincible. "It's working," she said quietly. "It's finally working." She stood and walked to the window, looking out at a military installation that represented the best and worst of what armed forces could be. Somewhere on that base, new operators were being trained to avoid the mistakes that had killed her nephew. Somewhere, unit commanders were learning that ego was the enemy of mission success. Somewhere, the culture was shifting slowly, painfully, but undeniably. Not fast enough, never fast enough, but progress nonetheless. Brennan returned to her desk and opened the next file, another unit evaluation, another opportunity to identify the assumptions and arrogance that got people killed. The work never ended. But that was okay, because as long as there were young operators like Michael who deserved better than death by friendly negligence, Margaret Brennan would keep fighting, one unit at a time, one lesson at a time, one transformation at a time. 6 months after Coronado Stone received a letter from an operator he'd trained in the first integration class. The man was a Marine captain now commanding a joint element in an operation that remained classified. The letter was short. Commander Stone, last week my team conducted an extraction that went sideways. We should have lost people. We didn't. Because when things fell apart, SEALs and Rangers and Marines stopped worrying about who was in charge and started worrying about getting everyone home. I thought about what you taught us, about assumptions, about ego, about trusting people who were different from us. It worked. Everyone came home. Thank you for showing us who we could become. Captain Williams, USMC. Stone read the letter 3 times. Then he folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer alongside the photograph Brennan had given him at graduation. A picture of her nephew Michael, forever young, forever smiling, forever reminding Stone why this work mattered. The transformation was complete. But like Brennan had said, transformation wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. And Derek Stone would spend the rest of his career making sure that the lessons he'd learned from a silver-haired woman who dismantled his ego and rebuilt his understanding were passed on to everyone who crossed his path. Because true warriors weren't those who never failed. They were those who transformed failure into wisdom, arrogance, into awareness and defeat, into the kind of victory that made everyone stronger. And that was a lesson worth teaching for the rest of his life.